Damn, all these skins look so cool. Wait a minute, what's this? A comic book? But I've never read a comic before. I don't even know where I'd start. Well, good thing I've got you covered. Because in this video, I'm going to break down comics for you guys and then even give reading recommendations for every hero on the roster. Yes, all of them. So brew a cuppa or whatever you want to drink and join me for some comics and tea. Welcome back to the channel, and I do apologise for the hiatus. Uni work sucks. But now that I'm back, it's time for the ever-promised month of madness. A new video every 3 days. And I wanted to kick it off with a fusion of two things I love, comics and video games. Loads of you guys play Rivals, but I know a large number of the players haven't actually read a comic book before. And the biggest gatekeeper into the industry is, well, knowledge. The knowledge of what to read and how it's formatted. So I want to break down that barrier and help you all out just a little bit. Before I can go and tell you what to read, it's probably best you know what different kinds of comics you're likely to encounter are and what specific keywords actually mean. So when it comes to reading, you need to know the difference between a run, a volume, a trade, an issue, a tie-in, an anthology, and a one-shot. Now that might sound like a lot, but it's actually really simple. Just picture it a lot like a TV show. Let's say you start a show and watch a new season. That would be a volume. This collects a few stories that interweaves into one bigger plotline. Each episode in that case would be an issue. These are the singles that you can pick up from comic stores and are how we number comic books as a whole. In this case, a one-shot would be a holiday special or a one-off story that doesn't tie into the ongoing show. A collection of these could be called an anthology. But then we have a spin-off show. These are our tie-in comics. They aren't usually required to watch, but they add to a bigger world and an overlapping story. But what about runs, I hear you ask? Well, that's like how you would categorize it if a different showrunner took over, kind of like in Doctor Who or other long-running series. Now you might be thinking that I left one of those words out. Trade. Trade is a term comic collectors use to refer to collections of comics in paperback or hardback form. This is kind of like a DVD or a box set a show would have that holds multiple episodes or sometimes an entire season. All of these together form the comic book industry. Key characters getting ongoing runs and then big crossover events taking place as single volume stories. Hopefully that clears it up for everyone going forwards. So basically, if you're new, you want to look for an issue ones within a run or mostly one shots. A good way to get into reading physical comics is to stick with trades. They're usually more affordable and they almost always contain complete storylines. Now, enough of the babble, let's get into the recommendations. I've split the comics into 3 categories. The first being more than just the hero. This is because whilst these are recommendations I'm choosing because of a single character in the roster, they massively affect other heroes in the game and comic books as well. Honestly, all of these are great picks and must reads for new comic fans. I do want to just warn you up front, due to the sheer amount of heroes in the game, I can't go into too much depth on any one of our recommendations today. However, I will give you guys brief descriptions of both the recommendation and why it's chosen, and obviously, if you guys really enjoy this, I can go into more in-depth comic book recommendations for any of the heroes on the roster, for the most part. But firstly, we have Mr. Stars and Stripes himself, Captain America. Now, Cap has had loads of great stories, and as one of the oldest comic book heroes, he's also had a bunch of compendiums put together. These are like collections of iconic moments. So if you want something a little more Cap exclusive, those would make for great reading material. But today I wanted to push onto you guys a comic I think is an essential for anyone getting into Marvel. This is Civil War. This story changed comics for everyone. The industry shifted upon its release, and unlike the movie, it had everlasting effects on Marvel as a whole. The main focus of the story are Cap and Iron Man, just like in the MCU, but it also delves into a few other icons like Reed Richards, Spider-Man, and even Punisher. If you haven't read it, I don't want to ruin the ending, but honestly, this should be at the top of anyone's list. You can find it anywhere really, from digitally to local comic book stores to bookshops and even news agents. Civil War combines both the political dynamics of a world, including superheroes, with the action-packed adventures of traditional Marvel comics, and it really helps understand and get a greater grasp at what the symbol of Captain America really represents. Of course, if we're talking universe-defining events, we must also mention Infinity Gauntlet. This story hits every part of Marvel Comics universe, and it inspired the entirety of the MCU up until the end of Endgame. And it's on here specifically for Adam Warlock. If you haven't read a comic book before, that might shock you, given how he's so unimportant in the movies. But Adam not only is closely tied to the Infinity Stones, but also acts as a cosmic symbol for oncoming end times in Marvel Comics. He's an interestingly stoic yet intense hero with some real iconic moments. Infinity Gauntlet also shows a lot in terms of heroes yet to enter the game, like Drax, Nebula, Silver Surfer, and of course Mephisto. And then you can expect to see some of your more iconic heroes showing up, like the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and so on. Following that, we have a character who is beloved by so many outside of the game, and a comic recommendation I think most of you will expect. It's Scarlet Witch and the House of M. Just like Civil War, but this time for the mutants, House of M includes a bunch of other characters and delves into them. The main two from the roster being Magneto and Wolverine. But when it comes to Wanda herself, there is no other story that really hits the notes seen here. If you watched WandaVision and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, then you'll notice some similarities, but where those two are able to run, the House of M comic book soars. It's truly a classic in the fan base, and one of the most requested stories for a proper adaptation to date. House of M combines comic book sci-fi with world-bending powers, all the way to geopolitics, and then somehow also brings in the idea of psychology and a being who's godlike having a mental break. Genuinely an amazing masterpiece. There are a couple heroes I wasn't going to put into this section, but ended up changing my mind whilst the comics I've chosen for them aren't as iconic as the three I just mentioned. They do still include other heroes on the roster, and so I guess this is where they should be categorized within the video. Firstly, we're going to talk about Penny Parker. See, she's a hard hero to recommend for. I think a lot of people don't realize just how irrelevant she really is, but relevancy does not correlate to quality. Penny has some great storylines within the Edge of Spider-Verse and Edge of Spider-Geddon miniseries, but I'm going to recommend the original Spider-Verse. While she isn't important to its storylines, I think as a Spider-Person, she is included within the comic's concepts. Now, I will say, if you're expecting anything like the films, you will be sorely mistaken. But I will then also say that the original Spider-Verse comic book is one of excellence. It perfectly encapsulates the reasons behind Spider-Man's existence, and the presence his multiversal variants can bring to a story. Hulk was one of my favourite heroes growing up, and I just loved everything he was in. Animation, live action, comic books, it didn't matter. And my favourite storyline was always Planet Hulk. Now this story doesn't directly tie in other heroes on the roster, or many from the comics at all really. It does, however, set up for World War Hulk, an unforgettable comic that includes the Xmen, Namor, Black Panther, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and everyone in between, as they face off against a raging green monster that is the Incredible Hulk. I recommend Planet Hulk if you want an amazing Hulk story. I recommend World War Hulk if you want to see destruction. Emma Frost is the newest addition to Marvel Rivals, and with her joining the roster, I need to put forward a comic run, not a volume or a single story, but an entire run. One that redefined Marvel and the X-Men for a new generation, the new X-Men from 2001. Shows who Emma Frost would grow into, whilst expanding the X-Men mythos yet again. If you enjoy her, or any of the mutants for that matter, give it a read. The entire run is on Marvel Unlimited, and is also available in trade format for those of us who enjoy the physical read. And I'm afraid we have yet another X-Men related story for this segment. It's difficult to recommend X-Men stories without involving so many of them. they're a team after all, and the iconic writing they are known for often comes from their group works. That being said, Marvel Rivals uses a unique version of Psylocke. As many of you may know, Rivals uses a version of her from the Peach Momoko alternate universe of X-Men Demon Days, where the mutants fight Oni in a feudal Japan-esque setting. It's a really pretty series, and I recommend it for any of the weebs watching at home, or just people who enjoy the Japanese watercolor style and folklore storytelling. Finally, to end this segment, we have the character who was arguably the hardest on the roster to recommend for, Hela. She just isn't often that interesting in comics, and it doesn't help that she rarely shows up in the first place. You see, her implementation into the MCU was a strange one, given her lack of relevance anywhere really. And then that has led to her at the very least appearing in tons of Marvel media, but her comic appearances haven't really increased all that much. Honestly, I'm going to recommend a short run on the Journey into Mystery comic book series, in which she appeared and had a key focal point. That begins in issue 622, and whilst it ends around 637, her appearances and the story continue for a little bit longer. If you want to read about Hela, or just really like Loki or Thor, then I'd give that one a shot. Now this segment I call Self-Indulgence, and that's because all of these recommendations are runs titled after the hero in question. Honestly, if you want to read a story about a character, your best bet is the one with their name on the front cover. And for these guys, well, they're no exception. Groot is a beloved and kind soul. He is the root of a dynamic and family-style team, whilst also holding his closest friends ever near. But personally, one of his best storylines is that of an origin. I'm choosing to show you all Groot from 2015, a short series where we see the Flora Colossus leave his species from Planet X and meet a young girl on Earth. We learn how he and Rocket form their friendship, and we see another side to the galaxy. It's heartwarming and genuinely beautiful. If you enjoy the big tree, I really think this is the read for you. And speaking of Rocket Raccoon being that best friend, he has a similar case of stories, and so almost as an addition to that, I would recommend Rocket and Groot from the following year, 2016. It's a buddy adventure where the small rodent and the big plant travel across the cosmos side by side. Moon Knight is a controversial figure in comics. It seems nobody, reader or writer, can agree on how his stories should be presented. Whether it's a mental illness case, a vigilante series, or a knockoff Indiana Jones adventure. Well, I present to you what, in my opinion, is the quintessential Moon Knight series, the 2014 Ellis and Shelby run. Honestly, if you love down-to-earth Moon Knight, with cool action and a touch of psychology, this is the one to go for. Now it's time for the mutants, and I'm going to start it off with Magik. She has a run that is currently ongoing, and if you want to give her a read, now is the time. This follows her at present and instantly gives you an idea of who she is and where the status quo is at. Following her, I'm gonna push you all onto Magneto, specifically his 2014 run. This does eventually lead into Axis, a relatively questionable event, but as a standalone series, it does an interesting job at delving into who Magneto is as a whole. Plus, he has one of his coolest fits here, not gonna lie to you. And then we have my favourite of the stories in this segment. For Wolverine, I want to recommend 1982 Chris Claremont run, in which he visits Japan and we witness Frank Miller create some of his best artwork. Simply just straight up. This story is arguably one of the most important Wolverine tales ever, and if you have not read it, I can't insist that you do enough. And yeah, that one Wolverine film was based on it too, I guess. Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, is a fan favourite, both in game and in the form of Sebastian Stan. But did you know he also has some pretty cool comic books too? Well, I could suggest some early Bucky adventures from back when he was a sidekick, or maybe some of his very early Winter Soldier plotlines too. But no. Instead, I'm going to push onto you a series from 2018, titled The Winter Soldier: Second Chances, in which Bucky decides to start helping ex-criminals just like himself in bettering themselves. Really a plot I wished he'd lent more into in the MCU's iteration. It also has him take on like a pseudo sidekick of his own for a short time. Genuinely, if you love Bucky, if you love Winter Soldier, give it a read, see how you feel about his comic book counterpart. The Guardians of the Galaxy films have been a smash hit on each and every release, and with that, they excelled the popularity of each of their members, most notably Star-Lord. But in this boom of popularity, you would also see a massive redesign and shift in personality, becoming more like the Chris Pratt depiction. And so I needed to recommend something that both shows a current, accurate version of the hero, whilst also somewhat remaining interesting. And so I present Star-Lord Grounded, aka the 2016 run for our hero. In this series, we follow the Guardians' now ex-leader, confined to one planet, Earth. He must leave his old space-hopping ways behind him and learn to live as an ordinary human, or, well, an extraordinary one at times. Another hero who entered a new light in the presence of the MCU was Blackwidow. Not long before Iron Man released, Marvel Comics started to venture into a mix of darker stories and more realism. And from that, the modern Deadly Spy was born. In 2001, Black Widow had a run that has now been collected into a handy trade for reading purposes, in which she acts as the spy we will now all recognise her to be. Some heroes started off right, however, and Cloak and Dagger are quite possibly that exact case. Now, I'm not recommending their first appearance or their first official run, however I am suggesting you give their 1985 series a go. It's an oldie, but it also depicts the darker side of their characters. I mean, just read this description from the official Marvel website. Yeah. But nonetheless, it does show off their origins, their dynamics, and it's a really interesting take on the characters. So I recommend giving it a read. If you're looking more for something more recent, then of course I've got your guy or guys. In 2024, Namor had a run that is still ongoing, showing the struggle the King of Atlantis must face. Later this year, the Thing is going to receive a 5-issue series, titled after him, where we see the Yancey Street hero in his hometown once again. And of course, in 2019, Mark Waid created the brilliant Invisible Woman run that gave Sue a chance to outshine the rest of her beloved team. It's Jeff is an Infinity comic, a type of webcomic found on the Marvel Unlimited app, and this one depicts our wacky and silly landshark in all sorts of scenarios. I guarantee you've seen art from this on memes and online posts, so if you want to see the source, that's the comic to check out. And while we talk about that Infinity comic, let me quickly throw in there that if you guys really want to read Marvel Rivals stuff, don't forget that they have their Infinity comic, Marvel Rivals, set in the canon of the game, following plotlines as to why certain maps and game modes exist. And if you're more of a physical reader like I am, the first volume of those Infinity comics has been released as a single issue in physical form, which also comes with a free emote, I believe, or maybe it's a spray. Might be a spray. And it looks like the second volume will likely release in physical form eventually as well. And then finally, for this segment, I want to advise everyone to check out one particular storyline for our favourite webhead. Yeah, this is my Spider-Man recommendation. In the last year, Marvel has returned the Ultimate Universe, but it's all new and different, unrelated, bar the maker to the previous version. This universe is a brand new entry point for new readers, and out of all of its brilliant ongoing stories, Spidey by far has the best one, showing us how the more things change, the more they also stay the same. In this world, Uncle Ben is alive, but May died. J. Jonah Jameson is Peter's family friend, and Spidey has a wife and 2 children. Honestly, I recommend it, especially if you grew up loving the Wallcrawler. And now we enter the last part, the final picks. These guys just have recommendations I think need to be heard, but aren't a part of the other two categories. They don't include loads of other characters, nor are the comic books named after the people I'm talking about. Starting us off, we have the Fantastic Four, more specifically Reed Richards himself. Mr. Fantastic has some brilliant stories, but I specifically recommend reading the Solve Everything storyline from the Fantastic Four 2009 run, that being included within the issues 570 through 572. This is the introduction of the Council of Reeds, not only an incredibly intriguing part of Ms. Fantastic, but also something I expect to appear in future Marvel projects like movies, and maybe even a reference at some point in the game. And following on from Reed, we then have Johnny, and how can I not recommend the most tragic of his tales? Free is a beautiful story of sacrifice and change within not only Marvel as a company, but within the family dynamic that the Fantastic Four represents. It's found within the 2011 run of Fantastic Four, and it's in issues 583 through 588, and it is a must-read for Fantastic Four fans. It also leads directly into the Future Foundation, an iconic change for the FF identity. My first ever Iron Man comic book was Extremis. This is loosely the inspiration for Iron Man 3, and is a really interesting storyline introducing a new suit, a new villain, and converging the businessman Tony Stark with the armored Avenger Iron Man. The Avengers you all know and love, aka the East Coast Avengers, take all the credit, but aren't the only team on the block. For Hawkeye, I wanted to pitch to you all his team, the one he's been running for decades at this point, the West Coast Avengers. More specifically, the 2018 West Coast Avengers run, where our heroic Archer puts together a whole new lineup of heroes to join his squad. If the West Coast Avengers are neglected, then it's the Great Lake Avengers who were left behind and discarded. These guys are kind of the butt of every Avengers themed joke, and a member of their ranks would be Squirrel Girl. So for her recommendation, I'm throwing the 2016 run at you. For a while, Marvel had a sub-publishing title named Marvel Knights, and under it, a bunch of the ground level heroes got some insanely good storylines and reimaginings. One of these heroes was Black Panther. In 1998, he received a story that would be known as The Client, and it transformed T'Challa into the hero we now see in comic books. Honestly, before this, he wasn't much, but from this point on, the Black Panther became one of the greats. Similarly, Venom would receive a career-altering storyline in 1993 titled Lethal Protector, a name, if you're a Venom fan, you will most certainly be aware of. If you ever loved the symbiote as an anti-hero monster in the streets of New York, this is the one for you. It marks the point in which Venom was represented not as a villain, but as a dark Avenger. Killing, yes, but also helping people. And speaking of Dark Avengers, we have the darkest, the Punisher, who in 1986 had his most iconic storyline to date published. This is Dark Reign, and it is a quintessential comic book to understanding who Frank Castle is and what a good Punisher story looks like. Now, we are nearing the end of our list and therefore the end of the video, and I just want to take the time to thank everyone for sticking with us during the break and helping the channel reach 2K. If you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps us out more than you could know. Marvel Rivals has its own favourites when it comes to the cast, and one of these would be their little OC, Luna Snow. Now, she does appear in present comics, recently joining a new team, but for recommendations I would push people to try out Tiger Division from 2022, her first actual team appearance and a good way to establish who exactly she is outside of Future Fight and Marvel Rivals. Storm is an amazing character, and above all else I simply recommend reading the main Xmen runs to get to know her. But if you want something a little more niche that she takes a main stage in, I would recommend the Marauders run from 2019, a sort of pirate-esque storyline in which Kitty Pryde, Emma Frost, and Storm, along with other X-Men, venture the Seven Seas, or the High Seas. Loki and Thor, brothers of Asgard, sons of Odin. They are known as the untrustworthy trickster and the selfless king. Well, for the stories, I recommend there is a twist on this, whilst remaining true to their character's cause. For Loki, I suggest you pick up Vote Loki, a storyline in which Loki runs for president, and for Thor, I suggest you to pick up for Unworthy, a tale where we witness Thor, who has no Mjolnir and lacks the worthiness to wield it. He is in search of his hammer and his sense of self. One is a satire, and the other is a deep existential cosmic journey, but both are great. Speaking of cosmic journeys, we now have reached Doctor Strange, and for him, I must put forward The Death of Doctor Strange from 2022, an interesting dive into the final moments of Stephen, and a really interesting read. Of course, to accompany that mystical book, I suggest something more sci-fi, like my Mantis recommendation, Celestial Madonna, specifically the 2017 collected trade entailing the complete story from the 80s to the late 2010s. She is a character most don't recognize in comics due to her differences between screen and page, but she is also a character with a shockingly deep amount of lore. Honestly, I recommend seeing what she's like in the pages, and I do think it's a little bit of a shame that we never got an accurate version of her. Although, unfortunately, if you do end up falling in love with her character, she has had very few storylines, I am sorry. And finally, we approach Iron Fist. Many people, including myself, were disappointed to discover Danny Rand was not the Iron Fist of Marvel Rivals. But that is not a problem, since Lin Lai is an interesting and deserving bearer of the mantle. In the storyline Shattered Sword from 2022, we follow Danny as he finds the next Iron Fist in the form of Lin Lai, aka Swordmaster, a real passing of the torch and a good preparation for understanding the hero you might choose to play. Thank you all so much for sticking through the video. I know there's a bunch of comics mentioned here, but hey, the roster is massive. Hopefully if I do another one of these down the line, I won't have to cover so many names and can spend more time on each suggestion. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video in 3 days.